It's a bright and wet Monday morning here in Lagos. Thanks for joining us on Business Morning. I am Bisi Adebayo. Let's begin the program with the latest GDP data from the National Bureau of Statistics this morning, showing Nigeria's economy grew by 1.87% year-on-year in real terms. According to the NBS, this performance was recorded against the backdrop of significant global disruptions resulting from the COVID-19 public health crisis, a sharp fall in oil prices, and restricted international trade. The performance recorded in Q1 2020 represents a drop of 0.23% compared to Q1 2019 and 0.68% compared to the fourth quarter of 2019. Of course, that reflects the earliest effects of the disruption, particularly on the non-oil economy. The oil sector contributed 9.5% to the GDP in the first quarter, while the non-oil sector accounted for 90.5% of the GDP for the same period. Quarter on quarter, real GDP growth was minus 14.27% compared to 5.59% recorded in the preceding quarter. Of course, the GDP figures will form most of our conversations for today. In the meantime, President Muhammadu Buhari on Friday last week signed into law an executive order for the implementation of financial autonomy for state legislature and judiciary. The implementation of financial autonomy of the state legislature and judiciary is expected to strengthen the institutions at the subnational level and make them more independent as well as accountable. To bring all of this into perspective as the economy looks set to contract further is the managing partner with Trans-Sahara Investments, Winston Osuchukwu. Good morning, Mr. Osuchukwu. Thanks for coming on the program. Well, let's begin with the GDP numbers which have just been released. Of course, it shows a weak economic growth and a possible recession. What's your take on the entire growth numbers?
Good morning. Well, like you said, it is anemic growth for a country like Nigeria, and unfortunately, these numbers do not show the full effect of the coronavirus lockdown. Those numbers won't show up until Q2. And based on what has happened in Q1, the only thing we can hope for, and this is sad to say, is that the economy is not as productive as we thought, because that way we won't see as large a fall as one will expect.
Well, you operate in the real estate sector. Of course, that sector contracted by minus 4.75% in 2020 compared to 3.45% in Q1 2019. Could the real estate sector have performed any better?
No, there's no way the real estate sector could have done any better. What you will find now is there is going to be a complete rethink on how we use space. A lot of companies most companies are not going to operate the same way they operated pre-COVID. So what we're going to see is we're going to see increased vacancy rates in commercial properties, and that is definitely going to make a lot more projects unbankable, and that will continue to slow down any growth we will have expected from the real estate sector. So I expect that this sector to remain challenged until we get fully acclimatized to what the new normal is, and we start to build facilities that are more in tune with that.
And how do you think, what suggestions do you actually have talking about adjusting to the new normal?
Well, adjusting to the new normal, we're going to have to design our buildings a little bit differently. We're going to have to increase the amount of space we have in things like the restrooms. And given that most likely this coronavirus is going to be with us for a long, long time, we're going to see that offices are going to have to be a little bit more spread out. There's going to be a lot more money spent on connectivity infrastructure, as more and more people will continue to work outside the office than inside the office. And for a lot of people, coming into the office would just be to meet for meetings and things like that. So office designs would be less individual offices and probably more conference rooms. But these are one of those things that we can't tell until we get to the other side of it.
Now, let's look at the other issue that has to do with corporate governance and accountability. The president on Friday signed an executive order granting financial autonomy to state legislature and judiciary. Your sector, which is the real estate, oftentimes serves as collateral for most bank loans and ends up with a lot of litigation in courts, which end up taking too long to resolve. But do you think that the granting of financial autonomy to the judiciary will go a long way in solving the problem of the real estate as well as other sectors of the economy?
I think granting financial autonomy to to the judiciary is something that's very important. It should, technically, in theory at least, give them full independence to do what they need to do. It will allow them to deploy their budgets in ways that will make them more efficient, and hopefully bring the legal system up to the 21st century. I do hope that the leadership in the judiciary take the time to spend a little bit, to allocate a lot more money from their budget to building capacity. And this goes across not just the judiciary, but to everybody that's being given financial autonomy. It's one thing to have the people, but it's the other thing to have people who have the general ability to execute on to execute appropriately and judicially use the budgets that they've now been control of.
An executive order is usually a temporary rule. It needs to be passed into law for it to be institutionalized and have a long-time effect. Do you see the National Assembly expediting the passage of this into law?
Well, usually when most presidents use an executive order as an opening gambit, and they tend to get close to what they want, because at that point in time, they have, if you look at it, they have a little bit of leverage in their negotiations with the National Assembly. And given that it's the National Assembly that has to pass it, there is a good chance that they get it done quickly.
Many thanks. Managing Partner with Trans-Sahara Investments, Winston Osuchukwu. Thanks for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you.
And let's talk oil prices now. They actually eased in early trade on concerns over rising tensions between the United States and China over Beijing's plans to impose security laws on Hong Kong and the possibility of sanctions from Washington. Oil prices have risen sharply in recent weeks as an easing of coronavirus restrictions has led to increased demand. While the tensions between the United States and China are beginning to weigh on sentiment, Brent was down 19 cents at $34.94 a barrel, and U.S. oil was down 6 cents at $33.19 a barrel. Now, both contracts have risen for the past 4 weeks, although prices are still down around 4% to 5% so far this year. And ties between Washington and Beijing have soared since the outbreak of the new coronavirus. And President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping of China have traded barbs over the outbreak, including accusations of cover-ups and lack of transparency. And clashes between the superpowers have included Hong Kong human rights trade and U.S. support for Chinese claimed Taiwan. Let's go over the fresh GDP numbers that came in this morning from the National Bureau of Statistics. Nigeria's economy grew by 1.87% year-on-year in real terms. And according to the NBS, this performance was recorded against the backdrop of significant global disruptions resulting from the COVID-19 public health crisis and a sharp fall in oil prices, as well as restricted international trade. The performance recorded in the first quarter of 2020 represents a drop of 0.23% compared to the first quarter of 2019 and compared to the fourth quarter of 2019 when we saw 0.68%, and that reflects the earliest effects of the disruption, particularly on the non-oil economy. The oil sector contributed 9.5% to the GDP in the first quarter, while the non-oil sector accounted for 90.50% of the GDP for the period. And quarter on quarter now, the real GDP growth was minus 14.27% compared to 5.59% recorded in the preceding quarter. Let's continue our conversations now. We're still talking about the oil market. That is one sector that contributes less to the GDP but serves as a major foreign exchange earner for the country. For the first quarter GDP release today shows that sector contributed only 9.5% to the economy during the first quarter. Our next conversation will focus on the downstream oil sector, and I'm being joined by the chairman of Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, MOMAN, Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji. Good morning, and thanks for speaking with us on Business Morning. Tell us, does it mean anything to you that the Nigerian oil and gas sector is a major source of revenue for the government but contributes less to the GDP growth?
Well, it's just the nature of the structure of the industry. In terms of foreign exchange earnings, it's virtually the major contributor. But when you look at GDP in itself, like you say, it only contributes 9%. the numbers, when you look at them closely, particularly for the downstream, our numbers are actually more reflective of what happens in manufacturing, road transportation, other transportation, that kind of thing. And if you see numbers either growing in those areas or declining, then it will give you a picture of the extent to which the downstream part of it is performing.
You guys in the sector have been clamoring for a complete deregulation of the sector. How will that help to change the narrative for this sector?
Thank you very much, and happy Eid to all our viewers out there. First and foremost, I would like to say that we're happy that the government is talking about deregulation. It's certainly something we have been clamoring for a long time. Secondly, the government sets policy for us as operators in the industry, but it's important that we make an input into those policies, just like banking would make inputs, and other people would make their own inputs too. So what I would say essentially is that for us in the downstream, what we are looking for is total liberalization of prices. We look for government to allow market forces determine the prices, particularly of gasoline. Already, prices of ADO, ATK are all deregulated. We believe that is what should also happen with PMS. And really, the narrative, like you said, all along, the feeling has been that this will give opportunity to marketers to take advantage of the system. But really, contrary to that, this is about the survival of the industry. It's about the protection of jobs in the industry. It's about attracting foreign investment and local investment to grow the industry.
The monopoly of fuel importation has been removed from the NNPC, and that means that oil marketers can now import their own fuel. How would this impact the price of petrol, kerosene, and diesel, considering the exchange rate?
Well, obviously, there's if we go to a fully deregulated environment, it means just like prices have come down in recent times, prices will also go up when international prices also go up. It's really difficult to talk about controlling the price of a product locally when you do not control the price of crude, which forms the key element for refining of petroleum products. So yes, there will be an impact in terms of the foreign exchange rate. There's no doubt about that. But we believe that opening the door and making market-determined prices will bring about a lot of choice for customers. Different product grades would be available for people, rather than this big bang announcement where prices are universally increased across the country in every location. You will find a situation where different marketers will change their prices at their own rate. So the whole idea of contesting and fighting against those increases will not be there, because these things will happen at a different rate and in different locations at different times. So that kind of impact will not be there. But, to answer your question directly, yes, the exchange rate will have an impact as long as majority of our product continues to be imported.
There is also the issue of subsidy removal. If the regulation is granted, how will operators balance subsidy removal with the Petroleum Equalization Fund?
Well, first and foremost, again, the pronouncements by government saying that there will no longer be subsidy are very welcome. It's something we have talked about for a long time. Figures have been bandied around, but probably in the region of 10 trillion naira has been spent on subsidy over the last 10, 15 years. You can imagine what that could have done in terms of health facilities, educational facilities, infrastructure in the country. But how do you balance it? How do you deal with that issue? We feel that first and foremost, you need to put structures in place in terms of legislation, because today the institutions that support subsidy still remain in place. The Petroleum Subsidy Fund legislation, PEF legislation, PPPRA legislation, and our suggestion to government is that we should really go the whole hog, taking advantage of current situation of low prices to amend the laws so that we have a situation where 100% we will not go back to the issue of subsidy again because it costs too much for the country. The industry itself has suffered because of this, and many institutions, many companies have folded up over the years, and that has led to loss of jobs. Apart from that, we need to attract foreign and local investments into the industry. If we don't have that kind of open market that attracts the kind of investment we need, it's going to be difficult to grow the industry, thereby create more jobs for people and to protect the thousands, if not millions, who are currently employed. So we need to see, going the whole hog beyond talking about just removing the subsidy to putting structures and legislation in place to ensure that it's a permanent thing rather than just something that happens only for a short time.
The impact on consumers now. What are some of the appropriate standards and regulations that can help to balance consumer protection and actualize this total deregulation?
Thank you very much for that question, because a lot of people have expressed concern, saying that, if we have full deregulation, that suddenly people will start to exploit people and all that. Certainly, we share the concern of government about protecting consumers. In fact, what we would argue is that it would be suicidal for anybody to try and exploit customers at this point in time. First and foremost, in many countries in the world where things have been deregulated, there are very, very strong consumer protection agencies that are empowered to impose very heavy and significant fines on people who seek to exploit or take advantage of consumers and customers. I think we need to have such institutions in Nigeria, and we as MoMA will fully support such institutions to ensure that we don't have that kind of exploitation. Secondly, competition that comes with full deregulation itself will penalize anybody who goes out of the way and charges outrageous prices. The market will penalize you heavily by driving markets away from you, driving customers away from you to people who are more reasonably priced. But overall, the kind of competition that will be able to engender will give a lot of choice to customers. They can go to places, it will be crazy for anybody to set prices in, low-income areas where people's earning power is low, and set prices that are as high as in, areas where people can pay a bit more for their fuel and probably have more expensive cars. So the market itself will sort all this out at the end of the day.
Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji, Chairman of Major Oil Marketers Association, would like to thank you for speaking with us on Business Morning.
Thank you very much.
We'll be talking about COVID-19 and food insecurity when we return in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Food insecurity is set to be on the rise in Nigeria, particularly in recent times with the advent of COVID-19. This, however, presents both a challenge and an opportunity for smallholder farmers and those seeking to invest in them, with the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization predicting that the agricultural market in sub-Saharan Africa will grow from $200 billion in 2015 to $1 trillion by 2030. And the FAO has said that about 7 million Nigerians will experience food shortage between June and August 2020, as 16 northern states and the Federal Capital Territory have been identified to face food and nutrition crisis. The FAO had reported that states like Borno, Adamawa, Yobe, Benue, Gombe, Taraba, Katsina, Kano, and all would be affected. But how bad is this situation? I'm being joined by the food agriculture representative in Nigeria, Alhassan Sise. Good morning and thank you for joining us on Business Morning. Now, the FAO lately has warned of food insecurity, not just in Africa, but Nigeria in particular. What has necessitated this warning? Is it all about COVID-19?
Good morning. Yes, FAO has been working with the government of Nigeria to identify the number of food insecure households in the country, with the goal to provide critical food and livelihood support. The identification of the food insecure household has been done through the Cadre Harmonisé, which is a consensual framework for the analysis of acute food and nutrition insecurity in West Africa and the Sahel, including Nigeria. The Cadre Harmonisé has been carried out in last March, and the results show that more than 5 million people have been were food insecure and require urgent attention in the period of March to May 2020. Those people were, as I say, located in 16 states, including the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. So during the projected period of June to August 2020, the Cadre Harmonisé indicate that the figure are expected to increase to 7 million people in those 16 states, unless resilience-driven intervention and humanitarian assistance is intensified in the affected area. Of this vulnerable population needing urgent assistance, inaccessible population constitute 314,000 and 378,000 for the current and projected period respectively. Now, with the COVID-19, FAO is concerned about the pandemic impact on those vulnerable communities already grappling with hunger and other crises, as well as countries that are that rely heavily on food import, and all those countries who depend primarily on export, like oil. Nigeria is among those countries. And we know that with the COVID-19, both life and livelihood are at risk from the pandemic. And if we don't take urgent measures to support those who are already vulnerable before the COVID, we risk a looming food crisis unless measures, as I say, are taken to protect their livelihoods. But I have to say, what is good, the good news is there is no panic at global level, unlike the 2007, 2008 food crisis, because there are enough food for everyone in the world. So this is why we have warned about the looming food crisis, not only in Nigeria, but in Africa. But we see that we have noted that all the African governments have taken necessary measures to deal with the impact on agriculture and food security.
Now, yes, you've talked about some good news, but let's talk about the numbers you actually reeled out, from 5 million to about 7 million people. How much of an assistance will actually be enough? Or how much of an assistance should be rendered to these communities? Because these figures are quite huge.
Yes, FAO has a great role to play in preventing and managing food crisis, whatever it is. And you are right, these the locusts that are invading Eastern Africa, and we are following that in West Africa. Even if it is relatively calm for now, recent FAO forecasts have indicated a risk of locust invasion from the Horn of Africa from June 2020. And there is a risk that some swarm could reach the eastern part of the Sahel in eastern Chad from spring breeding area in Arabia also, and in East Africa. If the desert locusts arrive in Sudan before the summer rain, the swarm are likely to continue westward across the Sahel from Chad to Mauritania. But as far as Nigeria is concerned, we have two scenarios. The first scenario concerns only Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and the Niger. It's a situation where the swarm starts from 6th of June. We have a second scenario. In the second scenario, Cameroon, the Gambia, and Nigeria are included. And it will be in the north of Nigeria, in the bay, as we say. In this case, the swarm can start in 24th of June. But what we are doing now is we are doing a close monitoring of the situation. And FAO encourages that no regret investment in preparedness and anticipatory action to counter swarm and safeguard livelihood, given already high level of acute food insecurity. And therefore, cost estimate for preparedness, anticipatory action, and rapid assessment has been already, and rapid response has been already assessed. And we are ready to deal with the risk of the locust. We are working with our counterpart, our partner in the region and at global level.
The FAO also says that it requires about 50 to 75 million US dollars for control, surveillance, and livelihood support by December 2020. How do you hope to raise these funds?
Yes, because with the threat of the locusts, we need rapid mobilization for the control, the surveillance, and the livelihood support to those who might be affected. To do what? We have to curb the spread of the desert locusts. As I say, control, ground and aerial control, assess the impact and monitor environmental health and safety standard. We have to safeguard livelihood, as I say, and promote early recovery, providing farming re-engagement package. A recent FAO technical note project loss of millet and grain production to up to 10 million tons in the event of locust attack in West Africa. As I say, the scenario one that concerns 6 countries, we have for the scenario one that concerns 6 countries, which is expected to control 300,000 hectares. And for the scenario 2, which include the 6 first country and Cameroon, the Gambia, and Nigeria, we have to control 500,000 hectares. And we have also to coordinate and to do the preparedness, deploy rapid surge support, facilitate regional partnership and collaboration, enhance regional advocacy, strengthen regional and national capacity. All these things require funding. And we estimate only for West Africa, this is for West Africa, that for the scenario 1, it requires 50 million, and the scenario 2, it requires 75 million. So we have the appeal, and how we will fund it, we'll use the available fund, which is not enough, but we are calling also for partners, including government, to support the plan. So it is a call that we have launched, an appeal that we have launched for the funding of this plan. But I have to say also, while we are doing that, we are anticipating the impact. To ensure maximum impact in a rapidly evolving situation, FAO is advocating that resource partners contribute to the locust window of the special fund for emergency and rehabilitation activity. This mechanism provides FAO with the financial means to react quickly to crisis, reducing the time between funding decision and action on the ground.
But tell us, Mr. Sisi, the FAO has an office here in Nigeria where you are now. Tell us how the organization is working with the federal government of Nigeria to avert the food crisis.
Okay. First of all, our approach with the government is through the country framework programming that has signed by the government and the FAO. It is what gives FAO the right to intervene in the country. We are here in the country since 1977, and before that we had some short-term activity. So our collaboration of the government is key, and it's something that we have to do for any action that we implement, we carry out in the country. So for this time being, we have the COVID-19, as we say, we are collaborating with the government. Nowadays, what we are doing is with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, we are doing an impact assessment of the COVID to inform decision-making in terms of implementation of the response plan, but in terms also of strategy and policy design. This one, we are doing it with the Rome-based agency, WFP, and IFAD. And we are also working at state level with the different government where we are to support the livelihoods, agriculture-based livelihood. For the locust one, we have already informed in April the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. We have been in touch with the Borno Commissioner of Agriculture, and so we will be also continuing this partnership with all government entities that are relevant to address any looming food crisis, including the impact of the COVID-19 on food security and nutrition and agriculture, as well as the threat of the locust in West Africa. So this is the approach we have here in all countries, and I think that we are in good way in our mandate in our mandate in the country.
Now, having said all that now, what would you say is a major impediment to the growth of food and agriculture in Nigeria?
Yes, we have the particular situation of the Northeast that is hit by a conflict for a decade now, and we are providing our support to those who are affected through agriculture livelihood package. But I want to say that protracted conflict like that, insurgency, farmer-header conflict, rural banditry, had led to rising level of food insecurity and malnutrition. And about 13.4% of Nigerians are undernourished, according to the state of food insecurity that he released in 2020. And we have also witnessed linked to support the food security warning system, disaster risk and emergency management, including strategy for proactive recovery. But we have also the threat to climate change, which is impacting agriculture yield. At the same time, current food system threatens the health and people and the planet. And agriculture alone accounts for 70% of water use and generate 25% of greenhouse emissions. We have the food system also that has need to be improved. I know that Nigeria is doing well, but food chain crisis and disruption caused by pandemic, pest and pathogen, desert, locusts, COVID-19, fall armyworm, avian swine flu, foot and mouth disease, all these things, and even tuta absoluta, all these things are concerns that FAO is working on with the government. So recently when we see some pandemic pest and pathogen, we immediately inform the government and we work closely for them to deal with that. But there are no efforts are being done, but more need to be done to make sure that the agriculture benefit from the resource they have. We have resources in Nigeria, and we need just to make it for the profit of the million of people who rely on this sector.
All right, Mr. Sise, we need to wrap up this conversation pretty soon. But the National Bureau of Statistics just released the first quarter GDP, and agriculture contributed 20.88%. From your assessments, could this sector have performed better than it has done?
Can you repeat the question again?
The GDP numbers released this morning for the first quarter of 2020, that's from the National Bureau of Statistics, shows that the agriculture sector contributed 20.88% to the GDP. Do you think that the sector could actually perform better than this from your assessment?
Yeah, it is. And in 2014, it was 17%, according to the statistics. So it's growing. And for that, what we have to say is we note that the government, strong effort of the government to support the country, especially in rice production. We have many measures that have been taken in place. And as I say, Nigeria has the potential. Nigeria has the potential. And I think with the continued effort that have been put in the sector, we can see more benefit, not only for the country or the economy of the country in general, the macroeconomy, but also for the household that are heavily rely on agriculture. When I say agriculture, it's not just crop production, it includes fisheries, it includes livestock, it includes all the food system coming from production to the consumption. Yes.
Quickly, in 1 minute, just before you go, what are your views on Nigeria's efforts to achieve independence in rice production? You have 1 minute to answer that, please.
As I say, FAO has noted the government's strong effort to support the country in rice production. This includes efforts to revitalize extension services delivery system, the establishment, for instance, of the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative is something that we need to welcome, and we appreciate it. It helps ensure farmer timely access to affordable, good quality fertilizer. We have also seen that the government has signed into law a national seed bill that ensure that need companies make good quality seed available to rice farmers. Because you know that the complaint of farmers across Africa is access to seed, to quality and quantity seed. I think this is something that should be appreciated. And it is in line with ECOWAS rice initiative that aim to boost, the rice production. Figures show.
All right, Food and Agriculture Representative in Nigeria, Mr. Hassan Sisi, would have to wrap up the conversation at this point. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And still to come on the program, a review of market activities for last week. Do you stay with us? Time now for last week's market review with Temple Ashaja. Good morning, Temple. So investors actually had a splendid time last week, right?
Absolutely. A lot of money exchanged hands at the stock markets last week. We saw a situation where the equity capitalization crossed the 13 trillion naira mark in terms of the equity cap. That's a major metric for a lot of major investors, market observers that we have as we have in the equity space. So look at the all-share index. We had been able to moderate our year-to-date losses, and of course the month-to-date performance continued to climb, looking very, very positive at more than 8% for month-to-date performance. And of course, equity cap, as I said earlier, was up to 13.136 trillion naira, which is really, really something to celebrate. Of course, we told you during the week that one of the major movers for this interest in the market is the fact that crude oil price is now back up to between $35 and $37 per barrel. That's something that has also been able to bring in some more FX for a lot of for the federal government. And of course, the central bank now has that adding more to the external reserves. That gives some room for a lot of foreign portfolio investors to be able to repatriate their dividends if they want to. So the pressure on the naira has now, mildly reduced, because again, even on Friday, we saw a situation where dollars, which was exchanging at $462, $63 to the naira, had now reduced to 450 naira, and that's at the on the streets, the parallel market. So tells you that crude oil price has actually given some positives to the equity market. And of course, the fact that the lockdown is being eased gradually by the government, federal, and of course at the state level, that's something that's also contributed to what we're seeing in the markets. In terms of the volume of transaction, we're up by some 62% last week. Compared to what we did in the preceding week. So look at the value of the transactions, where we have 18.84 billion naira. Now, if you look at the volume of transaction here, Zenith Bank, which is a tier 1 bank, was able to contribute more than 177 million units to the sales, and that translated to some 2-point-something billion naira. And of course, we got some huge contribution, 155 million units of Axis Bank also traded and contributed to what we have here. Guarantee Trust Bank also did some 104 million units. If you put all of that together, you get some huge contribution to what we've seen here. That's aside from all the other small caps side stocks that also contributed some thousands and a little bit of hundreds of millions of volume to what we have in terms of the total activity here. If you look at the value of the transactions, as I said, Zenith Bank, GT Bank, Axis Bank, and of course Dangote Cement contributed some 1.8 billion naira today. Today is Monday, 25th of May. In spite of the fact that it's a public holiday, it's the qualification date for Dangote Cement in terms of its dividend payouts of 16 naira. And that was one of the key reasons why we saw a lot of traction on Dangote Cement last week, generally adding the 1.8 billion naira plus to the value of transactions that we saw for last week only. Look at the deals, was 26,367. And of course, if you look at the performance of the sectors, lots of the banks, all of the sectors actually ended in green, as you can see. That's northwards. Quite a number of the banks actually contributed to what we saw here. But notably, we've got Zenith Bank that had 9.9% contributions to what we had in this space, and that's in terms of the gains that they recorded for the week-on-week, Monday to Friday. ETI, which is EcoBank Transnational Incorporated, also added some 12%. And so if you add all of that to what we have here, valuation brings us to 7.24% growth for this sector. For the consumer goods side of things, was up by some 89 basis points, thanks to the 33% gains that we saw on Unilever. Unilever had actually hits the floors in terms of its 52-week performance before. So some folks did that calculation and realized that it gives some headroom for them to be able to make entry at this point. And that's part of the reason why the year-to-date losses on Unilever had now reduced. But basically, week on week, it added 33% to its share price. 14.4% was also what we saw in terms of gains or appreciation over the share price of PZ PLC, which also added to what we saw in this space, discounting other gains that we saw from other areas of the market. In terms of the industrial goods segment of the market, Dangote Cement, as I said earlier, did some 1.8 billion naira. It was up by more than 4%, 4.5% specifically. If you put that together with what we have here, it brings you to this 15.45%, coupled with some gains that we saw from Kiotics, and of course some 23% week-on-week gains that we recorded on the shares of Boa Cement. Boa Cement during the week released its 2019 numbers, and of course it has declared some 1.79 kobo dividends to investors, even though the qualification date for that is towards the later part of the year. But we've seen that a lot of investors are beginning to pick up the pieces, the low valuation of this company, so that at a point in time they will be able to sell, even if they're able to realize way more than 1.79 kobo that the company is paying out in terms of dividend before the qualification date. So EPS for the company looks good, and of course several other metrics for the company looks good. Insurance space, we've got quite a number of the insurance companies pushing up the indices for this sector. Insurance was up 2.02% week on week. Oil and gas, we got Mobil. Mobil was up by some 20% or thereabouts week on week. Corn oil also added some 9.9% in terms of its share price. And of course, we had earlier from the CEO of 11 PLC, which is to be Mobil, earlier on the program, talking about some of their yearnings for the regulation of this sector. Perhaps that is something that investors will really be watching out for, and we will be able to push up the price of that company, albeit the fact that they're actually delisting sometimes in June, except there's a change of plan. We do hope that Mr. Oyebanji is listening to today as well. Talking about the NASD OTC, there was a decline of 78 basis points week on week last week. 688.51 is where we see the indices of this same market. Market capitalization still remains around 505.7 billion naira. Major contributors, quite large: Lighthouse Financial Services, CSCS, NDEP, that's Niger Delta Exploration Production Company, which is the only company that recorded a decline in price for the week, and it was down by 7.53% for this week. That's the only company that actually reduced. Lighthouse Financial Services was the most actively traded company for last week only. I think VFD also did some thousands of units in terms of sales. All of that, when you put together, including what we saw on Afriland and WAMCO, translated to what we had as total of 18 deals on these spins in the space. So looking at the bond side of the market, of course, we had a very well oversubscribed bond auction by the DMO during the week on Wednesday specifically, where some 390 billion naira was raised by the Debt Management Office, was heavily subscribed. It was a very, very positive outing for a lot of investors. At the end of the day, by Thursday, we saw investors coming back to the secondary side of the market to pick up some of the numbers that actually they weren't able to purchase at the DMO auction. So on Thursday, we got interest around this particular paper, which is at the short end of the curve. And of course, the fact that folks were expecting the 2035 paper to actually do much better and see more demand. But the demand that they saw on 2035, which a lot of dealers and treasurers were unable to get at the DMO auction on Wednesday, actually got lower volume compared to what they saw at the shorter end of the curve on Thursday. But eventually, we saw a situation where on Friday, because these numbers are actually for Fridays, and on Friday, the interest on the 2023 paper, and of course 2024, and of course a few other papers at the shorter end of the curve got some more interest. We saw demand on that side of the market, but generally we saw 78 deals at this point, and of course for a value of 180 billion naira. Look at the NTB side of things. There were some offerings, especially at the longer end of the curve. Look at 26th of November 2020. There were so many offers, but local players didn't indicate interest. There was no demand. For the OMO end of things, it was almost the same thing. There wasn't so much of interest, but we know that there are some maturities this week, even though we know that this week is going to be short-circuited by a lot of holidays. We've got 2 already, and of course, one before the week, another one before the week runs out, obviously.
Thanks, Temple. We'll see what directions the market will face when it opens on Wednesday.
Sure.
And that's where we end today's program. Thank you for watching. I am BC Adebayo. We'll be back again tomorrow.